gram stain is a differential stain, and we call it that because we use multiple dyes to be able to differentiate between different bacteria based on their cell structures. In this case, the gram stain is able to stain the different bacteria based on how their cell walls are put together. The gram positives retain dye, the gram negatives do not. In any type of differential stain, we'll always have at least two dyes. One is the primary stain, in this case it's crystal violet, and one is the counter stain, and that's saffron. Now, the way differential stains work is that whatever is going to be positive will stain with the primary stain, right? So our gram-positive cells will be crystal violet, and the ones that are not going to, the ones that are negative will stain with the counter stain, right? And in this case, it's our saffron. So essentially, what we're going to end up with at the end of the day is purple cells or violet cells that are gram-positive, and then pinkish red cells that are gram-negative. Okay. So let's go through very basic. It's not that much different from the simple stain, from the things that we've been doing, right? So here's my, here's my slide, right? Remember, very important, put the samples on the back side. So here I have my two samples, my gram-positive demo, my gram-negative demo, both of which have been heat fixed and they're ready to stain. So place it on the staining rack like we always do. And at least at the beginning, the procedure is the same, right? I'm going to take my crystal violet, my primary stain, that goes on first. And I'm just going to flood my two smears. And that goes on for about a minute or so. I'm just going to let it sit while I talk. Alright, so the crystal violet, or primary stain, at this stage is going to color all the cells, because it's just going to color whatever's on there. Alright, but again, remember, primary stains will always end up coloring whatever's positive. Alright, so in this case, we're going to color the gram-positive cells. Alright, so once we're finished, that's what it's going to, the gram-positive cells are going to be. Now, sometimes we're not even really sure what violet is, right? So what I sometimes do, you just go like this, and then put a little bit. That's actually quite a lot, right? But do you see that? That's the color of crystal violet, right? So when you're finished, this is what we're looking for, because and so usually what I say is purple, because we don't know what violet is. Okay, so there's our what our positives will look like. That's been long enough. Now we rinse, and at the end of every stage we're always going to want to rinse. So remember, tilt, hit above the smears, let the water roll down, don't necessarily spray it right on the smears, tap it on the edge like that, and we are good for our next step. Now we don't need to blot dry because everything goes on wet. Gram's iodine is our mordant, and what the mordant does is it's a fixative. It's going to fix the color to the cells, right? Now, sometimes people get confused and they think a fixative fixes the cells to the slide. That's not what's going to happen, right? Because we know it's the heat fixing that fixes the cells to the slide. In this case, what the iodine is going to do is it's going to react with the crystal violet and make it kind of big and chunky, so then that it kind of gets stuck in the gram-positive cell wall. Right? It reacts with the teichoic acids, a lot of gaps that are in there. Whereas the gram-negative cells, they don't have those teichoic acid, right? So the Gram's iodine is not going to react with them. Okay. Now, some say that the water inhibits the reaction, right? So what is commonly done is you flood your slide, a little bit of a shake like that, tap it off, and then flood again. All right, and you just let that sit again, just like before. All right. Normally you can't overstain these things. You can't leave it on there for too long. So you just let it sit and let the reaction take place. And some say it goes 10 seconds. I usually let it go for about a minute. Okay. So let's pretend a minute has elapsed. Just like before, we're gonna rinse. All right. So hit it. And now at this stage, the Gram's iodine will have reacted, and our crystal violet should have stuck nicely on our gram-positive cells, but on our gram-negative cells, it's still binding kind of weak. So again, tap off the excess water and the alcohol. Now the alcohol is what we call the differentiating step. This is the part that's going to remove the primary stain from our negatives, but not from our positive cells. This is the most important step of any differential stain. This is the step that can cause the most problems, right? So do this way. Alright, so typically there's no real time to it, right? Because the differentiating step is very dependent on the thickness of the smears, well, mostly the thickness of the smear. So a very thick smear is going to take a little bit longer to decolorize. A very thin smear, a little bit less. Okay, so what you do typically is you just hold your slide like this, you run the alcohol, and then you just watch the color come off at the bottom, and eventually the color is going to stop coming, and that's stopped coming, and then immediately rinse. Okay, and now you can decolorize too long. So if you end up decolorizing too long, what you will do is you're going to decolorize your gram-positive cells. Of course, if you don't decolorize long enough, you're not going to end up decolorizing your negative cells, right? And that's why this step is so important. Tap, tap, tap. Oh, and let me show you guys something. All right, so check this out. Do you remember how I said reagents would wipe labels? Well, there we go. Labels are starting to come off. All right, so that's why it's very important. Opposite sides, so then your labels don't come off. Good. So if we have done everything correctly, at this point now we have our gram-positive cells. Our labels are coming off, but that's our gram-positive cells. They should be purple. Our gram-negative cells here will be colorless, right? Because we decolorized them. So our counterstain will let us, or will color our now decolorized cells, right? So here we go. Just like before, we're going to add that in there. Now, just to add a little bit of confusion, what our safranin is actually going to do is it's going to color all our cells. Right? It will color the gram-positive cells as well, but because the gram-positive cells have that very dark purple, you're not going to see the safranin. Right? But our gram-negative cells have been decolorized. They're now going to end up in this nice pinkish red color. And again, you want to see what that looks like? Oh, that's not showing up very well. There we go. That's the color of safranin. Something like that. That's showing up. Oops, that's purple. There we go. So that's kind of what our two cells will look like. Reddish pink, pinkish red versus a purple. Okay? So we want to rinse that off now. Rinse, tap, and then blot. Ready for the microscope.